Hello class, my name is Erum and the topic of my project is female leadership and government responses to the COVID-19 crisis. The plan for my analysis is to separate countries that are led by women from countries that are not led by women. There are currently 21 countries in which women are heads of state or government. The second step that I will take is to cluster countries based on attributes in a World Bank dataset. The particular dataset I will be using is the World Development Indicators, and this is based on a study by Garikapati and Kadampati, where the variables that have shown to be important in the transmission of COVID-19 include GDP per capita, population in urban agglomerations, and population over the years of 65. Other variables that I extracted from the dataset include Human Capital Index, Gini Index, literacy rate, life expectancy at birth, population density, and others. The primary dataset that I will be using is the Oxford COVID-19 Government Response Tracker. This data systematically collects information on several different common policy responses that governments have taken to respond to the pandemic on 18 indicators like school closures and travel restrictions. It has data for more than 180 countries. An important part of this data set is the overall government response index, the containment health index, the economic support index, and the original stringency index. The overall government response index records how the response of governments has varied over all indicators in the database, becoming stronger or weaker over the course of the outbreak. The containment and health index combines lockdown restrictions and closures with measures like testing, policies and contact tracing, short-term investments in healthcare, and investments in vaccines. The Economic Support Index records measures such as income support and debt relief. The original Stringency Index records the strictness of lockdown-style policies that primarily restrict people's behavior. So, like you can see, there are many different columns in this Oxford dataset, and we created a data frame for only the countries where women are the head of government. And we had to combine this data set with the World Development Indicators data set, and we included the GDP to sort of stratify these countries so that we could have a more equal comparison, because GDP obviously it impacts the government's ability to respond to a economic crisis and health crisis. And so, like I mentioned, we bucketed the countries based on their GDP, and we can see that in this, as shown on the screen, there's five different stratifications of the GDP, and we have the Containment Health Index, Economic Support Index, Government Response Index, and Stringency Index for all of these different levels of GDP. And this is for both the countries where women are the head of government and the countries where women are not head of government. And so through this analysis, we came up with a few visualizations. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 5 equal buckets for GDP per capita in US dollars, and you can see them on the screen here. The 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are different brackets for the GDP, and from this analysis, we can see that when comparing countries in which women are current female heads of state or government and countries in which male are heads of state or government, the economic support index for countries with similar GDP levels is significantly greater in the countries where female are current heads of state or government. So this is important, and so this is an important finding. And that this next visualization is another stratification, but this is by the Human Capital Index, and the Human Capital Index is a measure of the human capital that a child born today can expect to attain by their 18th birthday. It calculates the contributions of health and education to worker productivity. One interesting thing to note is that if you look at the right side, the first stratification on the lower level of the Human Capital Index, the green here is representing the facial coverings, and as you can see, that's a very a noticeable projection of the face coverings for the lowest, the countries with the lowest human capital index that are led by women. And so, like I mentioned, the facial coverings is you can see that the highest recorded policies on the use of facial coverings outside the home is shown in the woman-led countries on the lowest spectrum. And data over time may also reflect the influence that leadership can have on setting good examples of healthy behaviors in a pandemic, like wearing a face mask or communicating health messages using clear communication. When comparing the government response indices for countries governed by women and governed by men at the lower spectrum of the Human Capital Index, this visualization demonstrates that those countries at the lower spectrum of the Human Capital Index in the countries that are led by women appear to have a marked difference in the containment and health index. So as you can see on the screen here, the containment and health index is shown in blue. And when you compare the left side of the screen, which is the countries that don't have strong female representation in the higher levels of government, and countries that, with the right side where countries do have a high level of women representation, we can see that the containment and health index looks very high on for those countries that are on the lower stratification of the Human Capital Index. So this was an interesting finding, and more research, should be going into understanding why that may be, what other factors in those governments may be encouraging them to adopt those type of policies that can help during a pandemic. Okay, I think that one was good. So